What's up, guys? You're watching Play Retro. In today's video, I want to show off my prized possession, one of my favorite handhelds I've ever come to own. This is my modded Game Boy Advance, which is in this bag. We'll get into that shortly. This is basically going to be sort of a mini review of the mod kit I got for this handheld. My overall setup. I want to show off my little game collection I've been working on, and also talk about my trip to original hardware land, using the original hardware and playing the original games. And then later in the video, we're going to be comparing it to one of my favorite releases in recent memory, the RG34X. As you probably already know, this is a modern emulation handheld, but what makes this one special is that it's a perfect clone of the Game Boy Advance and one of the best ways to experience Game Boy Advance today. If you watched one of my last videos, you know I already compared this to the original Game Boy Advance unmodified, and a lot of people felt like that was an unfair comparison, which given, of course, absolutely, it's not a fair comparison. This is brand new 2025 versus a 2001 handheld, which obviously wasn't even backlit. But just have a look at this real quick. This is Pokemon Emerald. As you can see, this fills almost the entire portion of the screen. The screen is also a ½ inch larger than the original Game Boy Advance. It does feature some extra buttons. It feels very, very true to the original design. In my opinion, this thing is worth every single penny. And over the last few weeks, what I've been doing is rotating across these three handhelds. I also have a transparent one right here just to showcase that as well. But I really wanted to put all these devices through their paces and see how they compare to one another. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. And let's start with my modified Game Boy Advance. I know you guys are crazy to see this one. Man, this thing, first of all, I know you guys can tell I love Game Boy Advance. Look at this. You see my table? You see my table here? Okay. That should tell you something about me. My favorite system to play, my favorite system to emulate, the system I have the most playtime on, something always brings me back to the Game Boy Advance. And this is a possession I wanted to have for a really long time. For whatever reason, I haven't got around to getting a modified Game Boy until today, right? Until now. I finally have one. Let's talk about some of the modifications I made to this thing. The most important one being the backlit IPS screen, which looks absolutely phenomenal here. Screen looks really, really good, really, really vibrant. And I'm going to put and I'm going to overlay what this used to look like with its original shell, the black shell. So one of the first things I want to talk about is some of the features of this screen. So as you can see here, there is like a copper little thing right here, and that's one of the touch sensors. There's another one right here on the top, and basically what this does is this one changes the backlight, as you can see. And it has 15 levels of brightness, which is really cool. Now, if you touch and hold it, you'll see it has like 5 different like grid styles. One is like a CRT, up and down scan lines. One's a dot matrix. If I get really close, you can see it. And then there's nothing, of course. So this is really cool. So you can mimic the way this used to look on the original screen, which I really, really love because I don't want the screen to look too modern on something like this. And then up top, now, if you press and hold this one, you'll see this thing changes colors. That's black and white. That's like a green. So it's really, really cool. When I first got this thing, I didn't understand how the touch sensors work too well until I found some instructions that wasn't inside the pamphlet, which kind of sucks. But reviewing this as it is, I think it's okay, right? First of all, I love the fact that this is solderless. Like anybody can do this. I'm like uncomfortable with taking devices apart. When I did this mod myself, I found it very, very easy. You literally slide in the screen like this, peeling off the plastic, boom, it slots right in. It has these two things. It has like a sticky pad. You stick it to one side here, stick the other side here, and then boom, you're good to go. You don't have to solder anything if you don't want to. And then it does have an option to solder if you really want to make the controls a little bit better. So one of the problems with this is that you can accidentally touch it, right? There's no way to turn off the touch input, right? Which is kind of annoying, right? It's like sometimes I'll go to pick it up like this and I'll accidentally change the color because I'm touching the sensor by accident. So that's why people don't like the touch of this thing. But I feel like it's a small price to pay for how easy this is to install, right? I opted for that, and I think it's not even that bad. Just, be aware of like, hey, I can't touch the device like this, you know, grab it from the sides or whatever. But it is annoying. I'm not gonna lie, that's happened to me a few times. I'll go to pick it up and I forget the touch sensors there, and then I'll just change the color of the screen for a second. I don't think it's the biggest deal. Like if you don't like the color, like if you don't like the color sensor anyway, you could probably just put a piece of electrical tape there anyway, so you can't ever accidentally press it and you won't be able to change the color of the screen. So, but then the backlight, you know, this one you'll always change by accident sometimes. So it is what it is. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world, honestly. But also I really love this kind of like holographic Game Boy Advance thing on the bottom. As you can see, if I get in really close, it's not perfect. It's really not perfect. You see there's like a little bit of black here and there. I think that's the way to describe this whole thing. Like it's really not perfect. Even the color of the shell, right? This shell, this original shell, there's a real version of this. It's like a rare, I think it's called Midnight Blue. It's like a Target exclusive or something. You can only get it somewhere, but like you can buy it in this kit because basically you have the option to change the shell, right? Or you can use your original shell, but if you use your original shell, you have to cut along the plastic. So one second. So here's my original shell. As you can see, it's like very, very beat up. It still has the original screen or whatever, and you can remove this, and then you'd have to cut along the right-hand side just to clear some area to slide in the screen. Now, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to make this install as easy as possible, even though I think the original shell is higher quality plastic than this shell. But first of all, I like the color, and again, I wanted to make this as easy as possible. But moving forward, if I do get another Game Boy Advance, I may attempt to do this mod with an original shell because I do like the way this feels. Which brings me back to this, right? If you saw my last video, I used the original buttons that came in the kit. Later on, I opened it back up and I swapped to the original buttons because they do feel better than the buttons included in the kit. So this thing's kind of like a hybrid between the new and the old. It has the original motherboard and the original buttons, but it has a new screen and a new case. And then in the back, you'll see I do have the AA batteries in here right now because I was doing something, and there you go, the screen changed again. Super annoying. But yeah, the cool thing about this mod, I also got the USB rechargeable battery. That's another thing I didn't love about this kit. So cool thing about this USB-C mod kit. So this thing's already pre-cut, right? It has a Game Boy logo on it, and you can still use AA batteries if you really want to. So the last time I was playing this, I was trying to beat Bowser and I kept getting destroyed. So my Game Boy ended up dying, right? And the thing about this too, it doesn't really give you a good warning of when it's gonna die, which I really don't like. What it starts doing is like starts flashing the screen, but it's like 5 seconds before it actually dies. So you really don't have too much time to save or anything. It's just like, hey, I'm gonna die, boom, I died. So that's just one thing I just dislike about this thing. Another thing, you'll notice I have this credit card that I cut up into a shape. This is basically just a spacer. It's kind of ghetto, I know. But basically it acts as a spacer because this thing is not the correct size for how it's supposed to work. So if I install it in here, right, if I have the spacer, it'll touch the contacts correctly and I'll be able to power on the device, right? As you can see. Now look, if I don't put the spacer and I plug it in just like so, plug it in all the way to the bottom, try to turn it on, nothing. You see that? Nothing. So again, this is not the highest quality stuff. This battery kit is about 20 bucks. I mean, I don't hate it. Like, this is like a small thing that I had to do just to make it work. But still, it's not that clean. And I don't know. I don't think the user experience of this battery is that great. It should have some sort of indicator that like it's gonna die. It should be the correct size, that you don't have to make a modification like this. I mean, I like that this shell is pre-cut to work with this battery. If you don't have the shell pre-cut, you do have to cut inside the plastic on the original shell as well to make this modification. I guess it's a small thing if you think about it, because after you install it and it works, you just have to recharge it every time, right? And look, just like that, it works with the spacer. But still, I don't like that. It's just kind of annoying. Speaking of batteries, let's talk about battery life. So this is an 1800 milliamp hour battery. And using the screen, I was playing with like normal settings, right? Maybe like level 7 brightness with the volume turned up a little bit, right? Kind of sort of like this. And I would say I was getting maybe 5 hours of gameplay before this thing like started like died, which I don't think is that impressive, right? Like 1800 milliamp hour battery, I think it should last longer. But again, I didn't time it. It's not like a super scientific test. I wasn't getting as much battery life as I thought I was gonna get with something like this. And I was using an original cart, right? As you can see here, I love this. I love the fact that there's like a window here. And this is the game I just complete, Super Mario World. Super Mario Advance 2. You know, I had to beat this game just because it had this kid's name on it, and I wanted to do this kid proud. You know what I'm saying? I own your game now, and I completed it. I just beat Bowser. So overall, I kind of modernized it, right? I changed the shell. It feels brand new. It still has that original kind of feel with the membranes and the action buttons and the overall form factor. But now I can actually see the screen, and I just have a slightly better battery experience, you know, now that I can recharge it and stuff. But it's not the best battery, right? If there was a better mod kit for this, I'd probably change it. So after doing all that and actually completing a game, you know, getting a feel for how this thing actually is, I can say this is an awesome device. Overall, let's talk about how much this cost me, right? The original Game Boy cost me, I believe it was $80. So $80. The mod kit with the battery was 70. If you don't want the battery, it's 50, right? So 80 plus 70, that's 150, right? And then you need some sort of games, right? Now this is the next part. Now let me show you my little game collection that I kind of started, right? Now this is something that I wanted to try kind of as an experiment to see how expensive it would be to start a little game collection, right? As somebody that loves Game Boy Advance, why not do the Game Boy Advance, right? So I have a little collection of games here. I think it's 10 games total. Yes, so 10 actual cartridges total, you know, with including this one. And then I also have a flash card. This is the EZ Flash Omega, right? It comes in this like little box. And this is kind of the cheap version of this. There is also a definitive edition, which I kind of realized later. I bought this one and then I kind of regret buying this one because the definitive version is better. And for one reason only, and it's because the way it saves is very different than this one. So after using this, like, it's cool, but it definitely has its issues. I already ran into an issue where I was playing a game and it just lost my save file and I can't find it. It just restarted the game. It fucking pissed me off to no end. So this thing, I really don't like it. I don't trust it. So I may have to purchase another one. But look, just with the flash card, this is 40 bucks if you want to get a crappy one like this. It's decent. But if you want a good one off AliExpress, look to pay like $60 to $70 for the definitive version, or an EverDrive, which is around 100. And that one has a worse kind of UI. Let me actually show you the UI of this thing real quick before I show you my actual game collection. So this was my kind of way of making these things kind of equal, right? Being able to play whatever game you want, kind of similar to a handheld emulator, but on original hardware, right? So this is kind of some custom firmware you can have for this. It's not really custom. All it does is add a few icons and make a cleaner kind of UI. This is what we're running right now. So I have like 20 games in here, right? Usually what I would put on this SD card is like the expensive games. For example, I showed you guys Pokemon Emerald was $240 or some crazy stuff like that. So I put that game on here. And I just want to show you how this is. So when you click it, it says clean boot, boot with add-on. That's basically booting with like save states and stuff like that. Write to NOR. So write to NOR is basically, you will write this to the internal memory of the flash card. It has 512 megabytes of memory, which is pretty cool. And then write to NOR with add-on is the same thing. Write to the internal memory of the SD card with add-ons, which adds some cool things. And look, this was the game that I was playing that for whatever reason, now doesn't load my save. So I go into it and I go into Unbound. I was actually playing this game and it's right at the beginning of the game for whatever reason. Even though if you do look on the SD card, I do see a save file in there, so it must be corrupt or something, which is super annoying. Another bad thing is that if you don't boot with add-on, you can't exit out of the menu, so you have to switch on and switch off to switch games. So for example, I'll show you this real quick. I don't like that as well. It flashes the screen when you're going down. Super dumb. So here we have Pokemon Emerald, right? Click this. Let's boot with add-on. So here I have MuOS running Kanto OS. If you look here, this is really cool. Check this out. So we have Explore, we have Favorites, we have History, we have Apps, and it's just like this cool like little Pokemon theme here. Love it. When you go to Explore, it tells you to choose your systems. So this specific handheld, I chose to only choose 3 systems, like just like the original Game Boy Advance, could only play Game Boy Advance, and Game Boy Color. So that's the systems I have on this. Even though this can play SNES and ports and all sorts of other things, I chose to disregard all those other systems, and I'm just gonna put these games on this system, right? So you go to Game Boy Advance and look at this theme right here. It has like the Pokemon kind of text, and it kind of has a screenshot on the side of this like rip across the screen, which looks really, really good. Same thing, I don't have too many games in here, but what I'm gonna do now is boot into Emerald so you guys can see a side-by-side of these two at the same time. So as you can see, the RG34XX has a bigger screen. It's about 1/2 inch bigger, where the modded Game Boy Advance, you know, the color's a little bit different, the screen's a little bit smaller, but that bezel looks freaking great. I can't even lie. I appreciate both. I think they're both great. I think the experience on this one's gonna be just a little bit better. Also, this is peak brightness. That's peak brightness right here. So this is a peak brightness comparison. As you can see, the 34XX is still brighter than the modded IPS. This is the hispeedido V5 IPS screen. Still brighter. So that's just the first thing, right? But the thing with this, I mean, at least this flash card, right, is the thing about the saving. Like, imagine you're playing Emerald and you're like 40 hours in and it just corrupts your save file. Like, this would drive you absolutely insane, and that's why I cannot trust this flash card at all, right? And you know, buying the actual game, for example, like Emerald, that's like not even, that's kind of out of the question. For $240, that's insane. I'm not paying that. I would never pay that amount for a game. It is what it is. I guess I'll have to do an updated video with a better flash card. But this one, the regular Omega, the EZ Flash Omega that I picked up for 40 bucks on AliExpress, which comes in this black box, this one I do not recommend, okay guys? So if you're considering getting a flash card, this is not the one, okay? But whatever, let's just move on into my little game collection over here. So as you can see, I do have a good amount of the Mario games. I'm still looking for Yoshi's Island, but I do have 1, 2, and 4. So I have 1, 2, and 4. I'm missing 3. Super Mario Advance, super clean copy. I love it. Looks great. Super Mario World, Super Mario Advance 2. This is the one I just finished. Super awesome game. I love this game. We got Super Mario Advance 4, Super Mario Bros. 3. This one's great as well, in excellent condition as well. Great thing about Mario games, they're not too crazy. This one, you can pick it up for like 25 bucks. This one like $20, $25, depending on the condition of the card. This one about 20 bucks. So Mario is still affordable even in 2025, which I really, really love. Here I have some other examples of great games you can pick up. This is a puzzle game, Dr. Mario / Puzzle League. A great puzzle game. Only $20. The US one, if you want to get the Japanese one, it's even less. Here's one of the best Spyro games. This is like an isometric top-down Spyro game. I'll feature some gameplay on the screen. Only 10 bucks. You might even find this for less in other places, but that's not too bad for a really great Spyro game. Final Fantasy Tactics. I know this is a lot of people's favorites. Shout out my boy Joey from Joey's Retro Handhelds. I believe he beats this game like all the time. Probably one of his most played games ever. Look at this, only $29.99 for this copy. Freaking awesome. This game is still affordable today. And the great thing about this game is that it came out on a lot of platforms. So I guess that's why this game's still kind of affordable. And then we have some other titles. Check out this Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I think this was like $18 Not too crazy for a game like this. I think you can find it for less as well. Just like I said, I think I've seen it for like 15, maybe 13 if you look around. But for this copy in this condition, looks really, really good. I think this wasn't even a bad price for this as well. This is an interesting title. I bet a lot of you never heard of it. This is Kong, the Eighth Wonder of the World. Now, this game I actually played a lot through when I was a kid, and I never finished it. And I told myself one day I would, and that's why I picked this up. This is like $5. $5. This is not the most popular game. It says something on it. It's not the most popular game, but it plays like a kind of top-down Zelda game. But it's like you're playing as like some guys. You have guns. You're walking through the jungle in like temples, solving puzzles and stuff. Really, really cool game that I have to finish at some point. And then finally, I'm not too sure about this game. I picked it up kind of on a whim. I've never played the original Spider-Man for Game Boy Advance. I looked at the menu, it didn't look that great, I'll be honest. This one may just be what I call a dust cover. So it's a game that I probably will never play, but if I was like selling my modded Game Boy Advance or something, I'd include it just to keep dust out of the cartridge slot. That's what I call a dust cover game, kind of like an e-waste, kind of shovelware kind of game. Which, no offense, I've never played this game. Maybe I'm wrong about it, but that's what I think it actually is. I don't think this is a great game, but this is, you know, a dust cover game. And then we got Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. I actually got through a little bit of this game, and it's surprisingly good. It's like an isometric, top-down Harry Potter game where you're running around like shooting magic and stuff, and solving puzzles. Really, really interesting game. But yeah, this is my little collection here. And one thing I've learned from acquiring these games is that you can have a lot of fun with not a lot of games, right? Like you can pick up Final Fantasy, you can have like 3 games and have a world of fun if you pick up the correct games, right? Let's say you picked up like a Pokemon Ruby. That's like a very, very long game. You're gonna put in at least like 200 hours if you really, really get into it. Maybe a Mario game, that's gonna give you like another 40 hours of content. Final Fantasy Tactics, you can put like easily like 200 hours into this game if you know, like if you really, really get into it. So one thing that I learned is that, you know, when I set up a handheld emulator like this, I'm gonna cut this down to like 20 games and just install it like that. And I think it's gonna help me just complete more games because there's less choices and it's more of a kind of curated list. And that's why when you see my setup now, right, there isn't 1,000 games in here. You see this is 1 of 20, 2 of 20, 3 of 20. There's 20 games in Game Boy Advance. There's 20 games in Game Boy, and there's 20 games in Game Boy Color. That's it. How many games do I really need? How many games can I really play? I know there's a lot of people out there that, you know, they'll have the entire game collection and they just love to doom scroll through their list. I hate that personally. I really, really hate that. I just want to focus on playing games and completing games, and this is why I recommend this setup to anybody that actually wants to complete games. You know, you can have those games on your computer, but I think it's better to create a little bit of friction, right? That way you can focus on the games you actually want to play and complete, and you're just going to have such a better time without so much decisions like, oh, what am I going to play now? When you have less choices, the choice is going to be so much easier. Like every game in here that I've put in this list, I want to complete at some point on this device. And that's just MuOS, right? Here I have stock OS. This is a modified version of stock, but it's basically the same thing. It just adds a little bit more flavor because you have like a custom boot logo and stuff like that. But look, even on stock OS, I actually really love what Ambernic's been doing lately with their stock OS. They've been polishing it up a lot. Like I literally turned this thing on when I first got it, and I was like amazed. I was like, wow, this looks like pretty decent. Like the UI software experience is getting better and better. And what I did was I just erased all the ROMs on it and I just added my own games. And that's all I did, and added box art. So here, obviously, this has like a lot more games than on this one, but I think this is much better for me than having so many games like this. You could just have way too many games on my device. But still, even the original kind of user experience of this thing doesn't look half bad. And then of course with stock OS, you also get nice things like a music player, a video player, ebook reader. So you can use this for a lot more stuff than just playing games. You can even watch TV with something called Willy Willy. You can watch like YouTube, I think, on this thing. It's a bunch of cool stuff on this thing. This software experience is just leagues leagues better than anything you'll find on a flash card. On any Game Boy Advance flash card is just looks horrible in comparison to something like this, right? And this is like the stock one, right? If you put on newly with emulation station, it's going to look even better. If you have MuOS, you can have a bunch of cool themes like I showed you before with something like this, Kanto OS. So the software experience is just like no comparison it's just like no comparison whatsoever to a flash card on an original Game Boy Advance. It's just like no competition. But one thing I will say is that there's something to be said about not having a menu at all, right? Booting directly into a game and having it start right away. I love that. I absolutely love that. Just to focus on the games. You put a card in there, it starts, and you're playing your game right away. There's no looking for the game. There's no selecting a game. There's no long wait time if you're using something like this where, for example, let's say you did like a quick shutdown where you have the game and you can instantly resume it. I actually really appreciate that about the original Game Boy Advance. You'd expect this for a device that's over 20 years old to not boot so fast, right? But I boot it up and it boots up super fast every single time. I love that. I love that. It's just like having, the experience of MinUI, right? Minus the UI at all, just straight to the game. And I love that experience. I also love the fact that when you make a save, the save is not saved to your handheld, right? It's saved to the cartridge. So the cartridge feels special, right? I like that. I think like there's the game feels a lot more significant when your save is not on your handheld but on the cartridge itself. So it's like it's your cartridge, right? Like I can't just hand this off to somebody because they'll have my cartridge, my save will be on the cartridge. But moving back to the original Game Boy Advance, I wanted to show off this case I picked up. So this thing is branded Nintendo with the original Game Boy logo. It has a copyright. I'm not sure if this is legit or what. It feels legit, but this thing is awesome. Like it has like multiple pockets for storing stuff. You can put like batteries in here if you want, or your games. It has another big pocket back here, which is where I've been putting my games. And I kind of like that it's not too big, but it's not too small either. Because if it was too small and it only had space for the Game Boy Advance, then where am I gonna put my games? And like, let's say some extra batteries or whatever else I want to put here, maybe a cloth to clean it. Whatever else I wanted to have in here, right? I don't have space for it, but this one's like, it's like a good size. So I can put my device in here. So this is the pocket I've chosen for this. And I like the wrist strap. I've added this wrist strap, just makes it easier to pull out of the case, right? And then in here, I would put the charger. So I kind of had like my retro handheld charger. I use it for everything, but I have this little charger in here. I keep this up here, right? Because I do have the rechargeable battery. And then over here, I also have some AA's. I keep some AA's in there in case I'm somewhere I can't charge at all for whatever reason. I use the backup AA's. And then in the back, I throw in all my games. So I just slide them in there. And I like that it's not too big. So I have to be very selective of which games I have, So in here I have like just those 10 games and the flash card. And that thing's pretty full. I might have space for like 2 more games and that's it. So that's my setup. It's really cool. And honestly, this thing's so expensive. I don't feel like taking it outside. Like being completely honest, so obviously this handheld, if you try to purchase a modded Game Boy, it's like $210 plus. So I don't feel comfortable taking this outside. I've taken it outside a couple times, but this is going to be a house device for me, unfortunately. But now back to the 34XX. I think this device is worth every single penny. the price of it, right? This is like $80 in comparison to something like this with all the games and stuff. There's over like probably $350 in stuff on this. If you just got the Game Boy Advance modded with a flash card, a shitty flash card, you're probably looking at around 200. But if you want some real games, you're looking at like 300. This is $80 and you can set it up yourself and it's gonna have every game you wanna play. It's gonna play great. The screen's bigger. The volume is much louder. Let's actually listen to something so you can have a hear of how this actually sounds. Freaking amazing. Freaking amazing. The speaker in this thing is a million times better than the original speaker in here. You could modify the speaker in here as well, but that's just more work. You know, if for somebody that wants to play original Game Boy Advance, right? I really don't think this is the way. Like if you want to purchase it, you have the money, it's cool, right? If you have an existing collection, right? I think it's great. If you have, keyword, asterisk, if you have an existing collection, I think it's great, right? Because you're going to have to modify it to get it up to par. And then even after modifying it, right? The battery life does not compare to something like this. I can easily get like 10 hours of gameplay, of Game Boy Advance gameplay on something like this, where this maybe I'll get 5 hours, maybe. And the screen is better and the sound is better and the buttons are brand new and I didn't have to modify anything. It's like it's really a no-brainer, right? In comparison to each other, right? This doesn't play physical. This, of course, doesn't play physical cartridges, right? As you can see here, it has a SD card, right? But I also can hook this up to a screen. I have emulation powers, right? I can save state. I can save at any time I want. I can fast forward through games, right? Like just like this, fast forward, just like that. Using MuOS, I can even change the panel, the color of the panels to be a little bit more poppin'. There's a million and one things I can do with this thing. I can add shaders as well and make this look like an original Game Boy Advance. If you look very closely, you'll see a little grid on this thing and make this look just like I can do on this one with the built-in screen. I can do that. It's built in right into the RetroArch settings. If you know where to look, it's super simple. And even palette changes, I can do that as well if I really want to. So you have everything and more in something like this. And not just that, let's say you love this kind of cool transparent shell. You know, we got a bunch of other amazing colors as well. Check out this red. This is a transparent red. Looks really, really good. Looks like almost like a Ruby cartridge. And it looks amazing. And look, check out these X and Y buttons, which you also have X and Y buttons. And you may be asking, what do you want additional buttons for for Game Boy Advance, right? Like they're not going to be used. Well, you can use them for Turbo A and Turbo B if you really want to. You can map L and R to those buttons if you really want to. You can do a bunch of stuff. You can do it for hotkeys, for emulation stuff. So they do have uses, right? There's also a transparent green. There's a glacier color as well. And they just introduced 2 more new colors, like a transparent pink, and even some colors that we've never seen for Game Boy Advance ever, right? And look at this, it's brand new. I never had to touch this at all, right? Another thing too, is that this has a power button and not a power switch, which if you know anything about switches is that they kind of suck. But the fact that this has a button means I can put it in sleep mode. It also means that I'm able to do hotkeys with that button. Right now with MuOS, I can have this switch between D-pad and analog with the press of a button, but I can also change it to other stuff as well. There's just so much stuff you can do with this thing. Listen to these sounds. Listen to these menu sounds. Just like Pokemon sounds. Look, it's freaking amazing. I love this theme so much. I just want to mess with this because it just sounds so cool. Huge shout out to the guy that created this theme. It's called Cantel OS. And this is a version specific for this device. It's super, super awesome. And there's also a Johto OS. So if you have like, you want like Johto Pokemon, there's also, I think, Gen 3 version as well. Freaking awesome, man. So in conclusion, I think a modded Game Boy Advance is really cool. It's also really expensive and I think a little bit impractical, right? For the modern day. I think if you want to play Game Boy Advance, the right thing to do is to pick up the 34XX. And I know that's a little bit biased, right? This is kind of an emulation channel, but just in the few things I just showed you, right? The screen, right? The software experience, the fact that your games are not going to get corrupted and you're not going to lose save data with something like, you know, the EZ Flash Omega that I talked about on this thing, right? Not just that, right? I also showed you that the software is going to be a million times better than anything you would find on a flash card on original hardware. The sound experience on this is like 5 times louder and clearer than a speaker in here. That if you really want a good speaker in here, you have to solder on new wires and install an amplifier and stuff, and it's going to drain more battery. It's just not made to be correct, right? It's just impractical versus something like this. Just a modern console is just so much better experience. The battery life, this is a 3500 milliamp hour battery, and playing a low-end system, right, like Game Boy Advance, you can easily get like 10 hours on this thing in comparison to 4 to 5 hours on a modified, you know, USB-C rechargeable battery in this thing. Just in those things alone, right? I'm not even talking about anything else. This easily wins as the definitive way to play Game Boy Advance. I want you to know I love this handheld. I love everything about it. I love that it's basically a modern remake of the original Game Boy Advance. They copied it down to the T, and they added modern comforts like some extra buttons and a bigger screen, a brighter screen. You know, you don't have to modify it like something like this. You know, it has a louder speaker, a massive rechargeable battery in here, and it's in the same awesome original form factor we know and love in the original Game Boy Advance. You know, after the first SP, I was kind of impressed with Ambernick, right? After this release, I kind of respect them a lot more. And I want this to be the direction they take moving forward. Just keep remaking the devices we already loved and just make a modern remake of that. Let's do the DS next. Let's do the PlayStation Portable next. Let's do all these handhelds that a lot of us grew up loving and playing. And let's breathe new life into them without the hassle and chore of modifying the original hardware. But yeah, guys, that's gonna wrap up this video. I do want to mention, if you guys want to pick up any of these handhelds, huge shout out to Lit NXT for providing this red unit. If you guys want to pick one up, you can pick one up from their store. I will leave a link in the description below. They have all the colors available right now. This thing looks freaking amazing. But I still personally really like the black. I think the solid black looks awesome. And I like that you can't see the buttons, so it kind of like blends into the console. But yeah, if you want to pick any of these up, you can check out Lit NXT's store. They did make this video possible by providing one of these units. And of course, if you don't want to do emulation, you can always modify your own Game Boy Advance if you already have one, or do take this route as well if you want to go through the hassle of making your own Game Boy Advance. So if you want, I will leave a link to the mod kit that I used for this device, and you can even check out my other video on how I did this so you can do it for yourself, which I thought was really, really cool. But no matter which way you end up going, either the modified Game Boy route or with the awesome 34XX, I guess you can say they're both amazing ways to
play retro.